Visual working memory declines when more features must be remembered for each object. A project by Lauren, Billy, and Meaghan. This study was done to investigate the limits of visual working memory capacity. It has been previously stated that the performance of visual working memory depends on the number of objects that were to be retained and not on the number of features of each object. This claim is important because many models measure the capacity of visual working memory by the number of objects maintained. If the quantity of features of an object affects performance in working memory tasks, then some previous theories may need to be revisited. Previous studies have looked into the storage capacity of visual working memory. One study studied the storage capacity of visual working memory by presenting participants with memory arrays. Each object had 2 features, color and orientation, and in one experiment 4 features, color, orientation, size, and presence or absence of gap. In the single feature condition, participants were asked to focus only on one feature, for example orientation, and change could only occur in that specific dimension. Another condition, called the conjunction condition, asked participants to focus on all of the features and change could occur in any one of them. This study found that change detection declined based on the number of objects in the study, but not between single feature and conjunction conditions. A second study used a change detection paradigm involving objects that were defined by color. This study also used the location or shape to investigate binding in short-term memory. The results of this study showed that features from the same dimension compete for capacity in memory. Features that came from different dimensions can be stored in parallel. Between these items, binding can occur, but it takes focused attention to create and maintain this bonding over time. A third study tested visual working memory for color, orientation, and both. After encoding a memory array of 3 objects that differed in color and orientation, the participants were asked to reproduce the color of one object or the object's orientation. In the single feature condition, participants were told which they would be asked to recall in advance. In the 2 feature condition, they were not informed and could be asked to recall either of the 2. The results of this study found that there was no difference between the 2 feature condition and the single feature condition in the probability of remembering the probed feature. They did find, however, that the feature was reproduced with lower precision. Why is this important? Previous studies show that there may be more to the capacity of visual working memory than the number of objects that are expected to be recalled. This study aims to show that the number of features of these objects can affect the capacity of visual working memory. This study aims to expand upon this idea and incorporates concepts studied in class, including working memory, memory recall, and memory span.
Our article investigates the limits of visual working memory capacity using 3 experiments. It explains that visual working memory capacity is limited on at least 3 dimensions, and it also shows that the number of features that have to be remembered impacts performance on change detection. For every experiment, each individual trial starts with an empty gray screen. Next, the memory array is presented, followed by the original gray screen. Participants clicked the right arrow key for a change and the left arrow key for no change. Instructions emphasized accuracy and not speed. Errors were signaled by a click sound. Experiment number 1 consisted of 30 college students, 25 female and 5 male, all ranging between 19 and 35 years old. The 3 conditions were administered in separate blocks, the order of which was determined at random. The extent of a change was varied to test whether small change, but not large change, would become more difficult to detect as the number of features were increased. Experiment number 1 shows accuracy of change detection declined from the single feature to the 3 feature condition and further declined in the 6 feature condition. This decline was not reduced for larger changes. Therefore, the effect of number of features in the experiment cannot be explained as the only effect on the precision of feature representations. Experiment number 2 consisted of 24 college students between the ages of 20 and 40 years old. To investigate limitations of encoding through verbal codes, or into long-term memory, presentation duration was varied. This showed that change detection accuracy decreased when four rather than one feature had to be remembered. This effect was present regardless of representation duration. Experiment 3 consisted of 24 students between the ages of 18 and 35 years old. It investigated whether an effective number of features depends on how many different values people need to discriminate on each feature dimension. It showed that accuracy declined with larger numbers of features, reducing the number of feature levels on each dimension from 8 to 2 improved change detection, but this variable did not interact with the number of features. Across the 3 experiments, a significant decrease in change detection was observed when people had to remember multiple features per object, as compared with single feature objects.
Author's interpretation of the results. For the first experiment, the author tested to find the change in accuracy when the participant had to recall large or small images or changes in the stimuli. Accuracy noticeably decreased when the participants were asked to realize the difference between 3 variables compared to 1, and the results are even more significant when the participants were asked to recognize a change in stimuli with 6 possible variables compared to 1. This proves that more complex stimuli are harder to recall than simple ones. This relates back to class because of its ties to memory and processing. The stimuli are categorized in working memory, but the more complex the categorization had to be, the less successful the participant was at recollection of the stimuli. Experiment 2 examined the difference in the exposure time had on processing. The participants were shown pictures over a 0.1, 1, or 1.9 second interval. The author found that after 1 second of encoding there wasn't a significant increase, but between the 0.1 and 1 second exposures there was a notable difference. This ties back to the main question because it shows that even though there is an increase in encoding for the higher exposure times, there is no difference after 1 second. This experiment discusses the limitations of working memory and verbal working memory, which we've discussed at length in class. Experiment 3 examined the number of feature changes and whether or not it had any significant effect on recall. There were 4 elements in the stimuli that were altered: the size, shape, color, and thick stripe orientation. The experimenters varied each element between 2 styles in one test and then tested again, with each element having 8 variations. Participants had a better recall when there were only 2 changes compared to the 8, which shows that the complexity of a stimuli affects the storage in working memory. What did the authors do well? The authors of this article were very thorough in testing possible discrepancies with their model. Each of the experiments tested multiple angles and possible methods that may have affected their original outcome, speaking towards the limitations at storing complex figures. What could have been done better? There was quite a bit of educational guessing in this article, assuming people were using a certain type of encoding or style of memory. The author frequently speaks on how the participants were or were not using verbal encoding to process the stimuli, but there is no evidence which tests the validity of that theory. Further experimentation on this topic might include whether certain colors or certain shapes are more effective for memory. It would be interesting to realize what might stick out in memory and recollection. How does the work relate to other areas of cognitive psychology? This article works towards an answer for the complexities and boundaries of human memory. Memory and encoding is one of the most difficult parts of the human intellect to be concise about, just because people sometimes use methods of encoding that they aren't able to put into words. How might this be applicable to life? This article could be used in advertising and marketing campaigns, helping companies stick out and be remembered when people see their billboards or watch their television commercials. Knowing how to work into the minds of their target audience and most effectively would give a company a huge advantage in the market. Also, it could help organize study methods for students or anyone else who has to remember things of a complex nature.